Apple's WWDC, infusing AI everywhere across iOS, Mac, iPad with this amazing split compute architecture we're going to break down in this video. So is it a game changer and setting the new standard for privacy in the cloud? Or is it an Orwellian nightmare? Well, if you ask Elon Musk, the answer is clear. This is the end of privacy as we know it. In what was probably the most pivotal WWDC of the past decade, and this is no understatement, we are finally getting a glimpse into what Cupertino has planned for pervasive AI across iOS, iPad, and macOS. Or as they call it, AI for the rest of us. Here you can see Air Force One himself getting ready to announce Apple Intelligence at WWDC tomorrow. Because of course they had to rebrand AI. First things first, Apple's ChatGPT integration isn't as deep as I expected. Turns out Apple has actually trained their own language and image models for most of what they showcased during the keynote, opting for a plurality of fine-tuned task-specific models. Models fine-tuned to things like summarization, rewriting, image generation in just a couple styles. Clearly, Cupertino has their house in order way more than the press and rumors suggested. So why did they even bother partnering with OpenAI? Well, this one chart by Apple shows why they did it, despite rolling their own foundational AI models. If you look at these graphs, Apple is super competitive on device compared to all the other open source models in the wild. And on the server, they're pushing past GPT 3.5 Turbo, but still not quite there. In other words, Apple's own server models were nowhere close to GPT-4 Turbo in performance in their human evaluations. But Apple isn't limiting themselves just to OpenAI. It has now been confirmed that Google Gemini will be an option in the future. So they're kind of treating it like search, where you can choose which model you want to use. But critically, how do all these models work together? The short version is that Apple's approach has 3 tiers. Number 1, they're handling as much on device with their own fine-tuned models. So tasks like summarization, rewriting, and image generation can completely be done by Apple on your iPhone, on your iPad, or Macintosh. Now, if it's a more complex query, Apple's going to shoot things up to their own larger models in their private cloud, which we'll get to later because it is a huge part of what they rolled out, and I don't think it's appreciated enough. And finally, number 3, if it's still a more complex query, they'll send it over to ChatGPT with explicit consent from the user. So you'll see a pop-up that asks you for permission to call ChatGPT. The genius bit here is really building a semantic index of all your private data to automatically provide context to various AI models.
It also includes an on-device semantic index that can organize and surface information from across your apps. When you make a request, Apple Intelligence uses its semantic index to identify the relevant personal data and feeds it to the generative model so they have the personal context to best assist you. Many of these models run entirely on device.
What that means for you as the user is you don't really need to prompt these systems or copy and paste random bits and bobs. Plus, you get a truly next-gen search experience. So you can ask for things like, pull up that podcast my friend texted me last week. How cool is that? Now, depending on how you look at it, this is either terrifying or beautifully brilliant. So I'll cover both sides and let you decide. First, the bear case. Apple 2 has fallen featuring Elon Musk. Here's a beautifully controversial image Elon Musk tweeted out to getting tens of thousands of likes on how Apple AI intelligence works. Basically, what he's saying is that OpenAI essentially has a backdoor to all your data to your semantic index for whatever's on your iPhone. Now, the fact is, Apple's reality distortion field is strong. It's kind of wild that with semantic index, Apple is basically doing what Microsoft wanted to do with AI Recall and Copilot, but without most of that big brother backlash. What semantic index really means is that all your private content, right? Your messages, emails, photos, videos, calendar events, your screen context is processed. In other words, they're creating embeddings, allowing it to be queried by AI models. It's really just Apple's version of Microsoft's AI Recall, and a far more elegant implementation at that. So if you get the new iOS or Mac OS, you're opted into all of these things by default, but it comes with this beautiful Apple privacy narrative. Meanwhile, Microsoft totally fumbled the ball talking about intermittent screenshots every 5 seconds and photographic memory. Of course, when ethical hackers looked at Microsoft Recall, it turned out that the database that's local on your device was totally unencrypted and completely in plain text. So homie built a tool to extract it all and called it the appropriately named Total recall. On the flip side, the semantic index is super useful to help make AI assistants contextual. Contextuality is the dream. You want your AI system to know exactly what task you're doing so it can almost preemptively help you. You're not sitting there copying like reams of text from your email or text message or stuff communications that were shared like 3 weeks ago just to be able to put in the right prompt. All that context can be retrieved automatically from this semantic index. And this works to power both Apple's on-device models and when you intent into third-party models like ChatGPT, and of course in the future, Claude, Gemini, or whatever. Okay, so this is super useful to be honest, but there's some obvious questions. Number one, is it possible to opt out of any of these AI features in iOS 18 if you don't want a semantic index created of all your private content? Number two, how much of the semantic index is generated locally on your device versus in the cloud? Like, is my phone going to be running overnight to generate these embeddings? I'd actually guess this is where Apple's brand of private cloud computing comes in, which we'll get into later because it's super cool how it's built. Number three, how much of the semantic index do third-party providers get access to when you send that query to ChatGPT? Can you get visibility into exactly what's being shared? So OpenAI says requests are not being stored by OpenAI and users' IP addresses are obscured, but this says nothing about the semantic context that's being shared. And finally, number four, is user data used to improve Apple's AI models? Like, are we all going to have our own personalized model that keeps getting better and better? Or will Apple use techniques like federated learning to improve the global model for absolutely everyone? Now, Elon had a very strong reaction to all of this. He's basically calling this ChatGPT integration at the OS level equivalent to spyware. And he goes a step further to saying that if Apple's integrating OpenAI, he's going to be banning Apple devices at his companies, calling it an unacceptable security violation. Now, would I go as far as Elon Musk to ditch Apple devices altogether? Because number one, what the hell is the alternative? Android? Probably not. And to understand why, we need to take a look at Apple's new cloud architecture, which is conveniently built around their own chips. So this is actually a hedge against NVIDIA too. I really don't think the stock market has priced in the significance of this rather expensive investment. Which brings me to the bull case. Apple has set the standard for privacy in the cloud while bringing AI for the rest of us. So initially I thought that with private cloud computing, Apple was doing their usual thing. They're just rebranding an existing technique, in this case, confidential computing. But I was totally wrong. As it turns out, Apple has actually taken confidential computing to the next level. It is so secure that Apple can't even comply with law enforcement requests, even if they wanted to. So let's take a look at what makes Apple's brand of private cloud computing super unique. Number one, no data retention, unlike every other cloud provider that's going to store your data for 30 to 60 days for all sorts of different purposes. Number two, no privileged access. So even site reliability engineers in Apple data centers can't see your data even if they wanted to. I can't even SSH into these servers. How cool is that? Number three, custom hardware and OS. Unlike using a bunch of Intel, AMD, or whatever chips that have a bunch of zero-day exploits, since they're controlling absolutely everything and have a secure enclave and secure boot, they're drastically reducing the attack surface. In fact, Apple owns a chunk of their supply chain. So if like a bad actor wants to go after this, they're gonna have to compromise Apple's entire supply chain, which is obviously a tall order. Now, let's say they do manage to compromise a server. Apple has implemented something called non-targetability, where basically they're masking user requests so an attacker can't route those incoming requests to that one compromised server. They would truly have to compromise the whole fleet, which obviously is going to make it more likely that they're detected. And finally, verifiable transparency, because without this, it's just Apple's word. So they're saying they're going to allow researchers to inspect software images to check all these assurances and find issues like they have been doing on iOS. Now, given the level of investment and work required to bring something like PCC into existence, it seems like Apple's actually been working on this well before this generative AI project, presumably for cloud processing sensitive data off your glasses. Like, just imagine processing a bunch of first-person video that your glasses are seeing all day in all sorts of circumstances. Pretty cool. And they may even be able to use this for those neural mind-reading Airpods that are just around the corner. All these situations where you're processing all the sensitive biometric, visual, and neural data. So, barring getting direct hardware access, in which case RIP, it doesn't matter if it's your cloud or your iPhone, Apple has truly set the new standard for privacy in the cloud. So wrapping up this AI intelligence section, Whether you think this is absolutely amazing or a massive departure from Apple's previous stance of wanting to do everything on device, I can't help but be in awe of the rather expensive investment they're making building their own cloud to process this rather sensitive data. This is better than anything else out there. And honestly, I would hope that the likes of Google and Microsoft would look at this and view it as the new example to emulate. I mean, what Microsoft did with Recall is just stupid. Like, how could they be so short-sighted? And the backlash is absolutely clear. They're making AI Recall opt-in only, so you have to explicitly opt into this feature, and they're making a bunch of those updates that they should have had from day one. When I see instances like that, companies can say whatever they want about privacy, but your actions are showing otherwise. In contrast, Apple is burning a lot of money to make this happen. It would have been way easier for them to just keep doing what they're doing with things like iCloud, which, by the way, iCloud is based on Apple data centers, but also Google Cloud and Amazon Web Services. In fact, in 2021, Apple became Google Cloud's largest data storage customer. Of course, the data that's being stored there is encrypted, so they can't even look at it if they wanted. But in this case, when you want to have AI workloads running on it, I think Apple has taken the right path. Now, I'm sure as these devices keep getting better and better, and if you think about it, even the 2020 iPad has a beefy M1 chip, which can do a lot more than the typical smartphone. So if I use a healthcare analogy, you've got your primary care physician, you've got your secondary care, and you got your tertiary care. That's the tiered approach Apple's taking. They'll do as much as possible on your phone. And so if it's just like summarizing an email or rewriting something, boom, do it on your phone. If it's making some random emojis, do it on your phone. But when you do want to send like videos, images, and a bunch of text, do it on their private cloud. And if even that isn't enough, they're going to do it using ChatGPT and in the future, other providers like Gemini. I quite like this, right? Not only for privacy purposes, but also latency. It's just going to be way faster if I'm doing it on my device and I don't need connectivity. Now, once this stuff gets into the wild, we'll have to see how good is the load balancing and the ability to route requests to these three different options. But right now, this is the best implementation I could have seen. Now, other YouTubers have covered all the other iOS 18 updates and iPad updates, but what I want to focus on for the last bit of this video is immersive capture getting a huge boost for the Apple Vision Pro. And if you haven't seen our other videos, we go deep into neural radiance fields and all sorts of advanced techniques for capturing the beauty and complexity of reality in rich 3 dimensions. Now, thus far, if you wanted to do 3D capture, you had to take spatial photos or videos on your phone or with the headset itself. But now, any 2D photos in your existing library can be automatically converted to spatial photos using machine learning, giving it that gorgeous parallax and depth. Now, it's just photos today, but it is safe to assume that video conversion is right around the corner. I kind of feel bad for the plurality of 2D to 3D conversion apps that are quickly going to wane in relevance. But hey, this isn't the first time Apple has Sherlocked their developers. If you go look at the list of things that are no longer relevant after this WWDC, it is a long, long list. Meanwhile, on the professional end, we finally know what's been hiding in those enclosures captured on the sets of Apple TV productions last year. Turns out it's this gorgeous Blackmagic camera that's capable of shooting 8K 90 frames per second per eye. That is more than enough resolution to saturate the heck out of those Apple Vision Pro displays. 8K per eye at the aspect ratio they've got means it's a whopping 235 megapixels. Plus, it's RAW. You get 16 stops of dynamic range. In fact, Blackmagic goes a step further, baking in that lens calibration metadata, which is super important when you want to unwrap these fisheye images for viewing finally in the headset. Oh, and by the way, you also get live preview on the Apple Vision Pro. Now, I'm going to guess the closest Blackmagic camera in this tier is like 15 grand. So I'm safely going to guess with the increased resolution, the increased frame rates, and all the other bells and whistles, this is going to be like a $30,000 to $40,000 camera. Accessible for professionals that might be dishing out money for like crazy red and Blackmagic rigs, but not so much for the rest of us. So on the cheaper end, Apple's partnering with Canon to announce this new periscopic lens that we got a sneak peek at CES in the couple $1,000 range. They already had this amazing lens, which I own for a full frame camera, and now you've got an option on a smaller, more compact sensor size. Super, super cool, and it'll be coming out later this year. All right, so to wrap things up, I'm super impressed with Apple's showing at WWDC. This is everything I could have wanted. It actually looks practical and useful. Now, I'm not gonna go and use Apple's AI image generator. People like you and me perhaps are just gonna keep using Midjourney or Stable Diffusion or whatever higher end tool that we use. But in line with AI for the rest of us, like my parents or my colleagues that maybe are doing a keynote presentation that don't even know Midjourney exists, are probably going to take advantage of some of these capabilities. Meanwhile, I think the semantic index is going to be a huge boon, taking us towards that AI assistant we all want, that Jarvis-like experience.
Wake up, Daddy's home.
Welcome home, son.
Where it almost preemptively reads your mind and can help you exactly in the context you're operating. Like, I don't enjoy prompting. I don't think many people do unless you're actually developing an application. I want this stuff to just happen automatically. And Apple, with its full stack approach from hardware to software, has the right chops to make it happen. I mean, let me just take a very simple example of notifications. Like, the list of notifications is absolutely absurd. So if I have do not disturb on, and given there's a semantic index comprised of all my texts, my phone is smart enough to be able to surface, hey, this text is actually important. It says like, call me back right now, versus the litany of other notifications I could safely ignore. This is actually going to be useful in my day-to-day life. Text writing and summarization, I hate switching context and going into another application, or opting in and giving permission for every private email I'm writing just to get a little bit of grammar feedback. RIP Grammarly, but I'm okay with that because now I can do it all on my device. That's going to be really cool. And finally, private cloud computing. Like, when these events happen, a bunch of influencers, analysts, what have you, are quick to form decisions, right? We need to get our commentary out ASAP. But as I looked into some of this stuff and really absorbed it, I was kind of amazed at the extent to which this company is going to secure your data in the cloud. Like, and the stock market reaction is very interesting too. It initially dropped because people were like, why are you wasting all this money? And also, this doesn't look nearly as sophisticated as everything else. But I think as these analysts grokked exactly what was going on, you can see the stock price correct itself. All this to say, I think Apple has a very unique advantage. It is, in a sense, the ultimate walled garden. And now we have a bunch of these devices that work beautifully with each other. Your iPhone, your Mac, your iPod, the Apple Vision Pro, all these things in concert are now getting infused with AI intelligence. That's super exciting to me, and I can't wait to see where they take things next. The biggest benefit in all of this are also developers. They'll be able to take advantage of all these capabilities. Like, why start paying the Jensen NVIDIA tax when you can take advantage of on-device models that ship with every freaking iPhone, Mac, and iPad? That's going to be a huge boon for developers that also want to infuse AI into those applications. All this to say, this is a super exciting first inning for Apple. But where does this leave ChatGPT? I think they're playing a genius move here. With this three-tier approach that we talked about, ChatGPT is only delegated for the heaviest of tasks. And soon you'll be able to choose something like Google. And given that Google has a rather lucrative AI deal with Apple, I mean, literally, they're paying Apple $10 to $20 billion a year to be the default search engine. You can imagine that weighing into the calculation here. So as far as Apple goes, Apple's the girl everyone wants to take to prom. And in fact, Apple's putting all these companies in a bidding war for their massive user base. In the US, 50% of phones are iPhones. Internationally, it's more like 20 or 30% because Android has a disproportionate presence. So Google has a distribution advantage too. Apple obviously does as well, but when it comes to monetization, only 30% of global App Store, Play Store revenue accounts for Android devices. The rest is Apple. The most lucrative user base that developers are going to be vying for is undoubtedly on Apple. Meanwhile, it looks like Apple's own server-side models aren't quite there at that GPT-4 level, but they will be, and at that point, you no longer need that pop-up, and you no longer need to hit ChatGPT servers over in Microsoft or Oracle land. Instead, you can do it all on Apple's private cloud computing. So to me, this looks like a best of both worlds for the user, and a really good bet for Apple to roll out AI ubiquitously across their platform, slowly being able to replace the cloud-side models as their own capabilities get better. Now, there's many other things Apple could have done. I don't expect any model in isolation to be anywhere close to the frontier models in that regard, whether it's on device or in the cloud. But Apple's approach is meeting users where they are. Again, it's AI for the rest of us. It may not always be for the super users like me, but given the fact that this is on the iPhone and in the context of the applications I'm using every day, I'm going to end up using it. A great example is generative fill in Photoshop. Like, sure, Midjourney does better in painting. Stable Diffusion and Comfy UI does better in painting. And even though Adobe's in painting is like 80% as good, it's in Photoshop, so I'm going to end up using it way more, and I do. Finally, PCC, or private cloud computing. In a world where Adobe is getting a bunch of crap from all their customers about their update in terms of service, basically giving them this rather extensive and sweeping license of your work and the ability to train machine learning models, even though Adobe says in a blog post right now anyway that they're not training generative AI on it, they can still train a lot of other things and generally use use private user data in their cloud to improve Adobe products and services. Instead, Apple is taking this huge privacy stance, and I think that goes with their brand. The number of private lock visualizations you see in every Apple keynote advertising is too damn high, but now they're putting their money where their mouth is. This is the kind of cloud approach I'd expect Adobe to take, versus putting their hands up and saying, well, this is just like standard in the cloud, so we do exactly this. Apple saying, nah, here's the new standard. So here's hoping everyone else follow suit. So there you have it, Apple WWDC infusing AI everywhere with a split compute architecture. In my books, a game changer with very minimal causes for concern. And as far as Elon Musk goes, I mean, I have to say, this is the first time I've seen it be blatantly obvious that Elon is biased. Obviously, he's raised a boatload of money for xAI, his own AI ventures, and actually rerouted a bunch of NVIDIA GPUs from Tesla to X and xAI. And now he's left in the lurch, right? Google's got Android. ChatGPT's now partnering in bed with Apple. What does Elon have? This is going to be very, very tough for him to get the type of distribution to bring AI to users at a billion user scale. So in my opinion, I think his concerns are totally overblown. But what do you think? Do you agree with Elon? Do you trust Apple? Or are you going to wait for industry security analysts to actually verify everything that they're doing? And right after Elon made a bunch of these claims, it's also funny because he withdrew his civil suit against OpenAI. Wonder if that had anything to do with how antsy and angry he's feeling. Anyway, that's my thought. What do you think? Is Elon right here? Is this the end of privacy as we know it? Has Apple fallen too? Or is Apple actually setting the new standard for privacy in the cloud and bringing AI to everyone? That's it for this video, and I will see y'all in the next one. Cheers.